Yeah, I'm also want to hold on. Let me do this. Yeah, I'm also great.
All right. Cool.
Okay. We are coming to you live. Hello, welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Great. All right. Cool.
Okay. My name is Rachel, and I work for the Seattle Chamber Music Society as our Director of Education and Operations. I am currently sitting in our lovely living room at our Center for Chamber Music in downtown Seattle. Very happy to be here, very happy to be able to bring some information to all of you about our upcoming winter festival. For those of you who don't know or who might need a refresher, we will be recording 6 concerts, full-length concerts of chamber music, right here in this very space over the next couple of weeks. And we will be releasing those concerts twice a week, starting on February 3rd and running through February the 20th. They'll be available for streaming through March the 15th. You can purchase either a concert at a time, or you can get an entire subscription to all 6 for just $100. We hope that you're all planning to join us. For those of you just tuning in, I want to say welcome again. My name again is Rachel Soprati, and this is the Seattle Chamber Music Society coming to you live from our Center for Chamber Music in downtown Seattle. I'm just now going to introduce our fantastic lecturer for this evening. Her name is Kori Hill, and she is a PhD candidate at UNC Chapel Hill in music history or musicology?
Musicology, yeah.
Musicology. Kori is an expert on the composer Florence Price, but she has many other interests, and she's a contributor on the I Care If You Listen blog, so you can check out her writings there. And I'm going to turn it over to her. She's going to be talking about the duo sonata form and walking us through various pieces that you're going to hear throughout the Winter Festival. And if you look below this video in the description, you will see a listing of the pieces that she's going to be talking about and what concert you can find them on. So thank you so much, Kori.
All right. Thank you for that introduction, Rachel. And welcome to everyone again. I want to first thank Rachel and the donors and Connie and Kimberly of the Seattle Chamber Music Society for providing me this opportunity to talk with you about some of the pieces you will hear during the organization's virtual winter festival. Now, since we are doing this virtually, electronically, if at any point the audio goes out or it's finicky or something is lost that I've said, please feel free to write that in the chat within YouTube, and Rachel will communicate that to me. So if there's anything I need to repeat or replay, just go ahead and let us know. So with that, let us dive into this topic. But before we get to the actual music, I'd like to first start with the story. I always love starting with stories. As a classical violinist, sonatas were only second to concertos as a genre that was a necessary component of my music education. Though originally the term sonata described a work for instruments versus a work for voice, which were referred to as cantatas, and this is like the 1500s into the early 1600s, by the time we get to the Baroque era, so kind of the dawn of the 18th century, getting into the 1700s, sonatas became more formalized as a genre for solo instrument. Could be just for solo piano, could be for solo violin, but could also be for solo instrument with the piano, so violin and piano or cello and piano, as we'll see in some of the examples later on. Now, during my years as a master's student, my teacher assigned me Brahms's second and first violin sonatas in that order, and I began to listen and practice them like immediately. I was so excited. For the second violin sonata, finding a pianist wasn't hard. If anything, the piano professor who wanted to perform the work needed a violinist, and I was offered the opportunity to play, and I was like, yes, let's do it. But when I shared with my friends that I was learning Brahms's G major sonata, the response was so similar it became a cliche. Oh, good luck finding a pianist. Why? I asked. The piano part is so hard. Now this answer surprised me. Yes, these sonatas were for violin and piano, but was it any harder than a solo piano sonata or a piano concerto? Maybe not harder, but they are very technically demanding. Brahms's piano writing in the violin sonatas is that of a condensed orchestra that weaves in and out of the foreground and requires consistent counting from both parties to avoid disconnection. In my study of sonatas, they have rarely been presented as a duet between instruments, but whether it was the Brahms G major sonata or the Franck A major sonata, I approached rehearsal not from the position that I was a violinist accompanied by a pianist, but that I was a violinist playing with a pianist, that I was taking part in a two-way conversation, that I was taking part in a duet. The terminology may seem innocuous, but it results in a conceptual shift that makes it a collaboration of equals, taking the audience on your journey through the melodic development, harmonic shifts, and emotional peaks of the composition. The pieces from the Chamber Series, the Seattle Chamber Music Society's Winter Chamber Series, that are the focus of this talk, explore the many ways composers have used the sonata genre as a method of conversation, collaboration, and support. Rather than discuss these pieces chronologically, they are roughly organized by their formal structures, which range from the standard 3 or 4 movements to 5 or 2. Some of these selections aren't even labeled sonatas, but share enough features in their form and content that they are included in this discussion. So while I said we weren't going through each piece chronologically, we will start with the earliest example, which comes from Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart. And so this is a painting we have of Mozart, his sister Nana, their father Leopold, and their deceased mother Maria Anna. While Mozart is best remembered for his operas, symphonies, and concertos for piano and violin, he also contributed extensively to the sonata genre. Mozart composed 52 violin sonatas, 36 of which are considered mature, and the violin sonata number 18 in G major, the K301, is one of the most popular. The K301 sonata was completed during a period of professional uncertainty. He was fired from the Salzburg court, traveled for nearly a year looking for other employment opportunities, lost his mother to illness, she had accompanied him on this job-finding trip, and resumed employment at Salzburg for another 3 years before leaving for good to work as a freelance musician. Now, the G major sonata has only 2 movements, and while the second movement of a sonata was typically slow to contrast in character with the first and third movements, the second movement of Mozart's G major sonata is even more exuberant and cheerful than the first. This work also marks a shift in Mozart's approach to sonata writing. While the previous works foreground the piano, here it serves a more supportive role, adding harmonic texture to violin's melody or responding in conclusion to a thematic idea. And we can even see the remnants of this shift in the title itself, Sonata for Piano and Violin, rather than Sonata for Violin and Piano, which became more common in the successive decades. A little less than 80 years after Mozart completed his 18th violin sonata, Robert Schumann got to work on his second one. Completed in 1851, and dedicated to violinist Ferdinand David, the Violin Sonata No. 2 in D minor premiered in 1853 under the keen interpretive fingers of pianist Clara Schumann, Robert's wife, who is pictured here with him at the piano, and violinist Joseph Joachim. Several weeks after the D minor's debut, Joachim expressed his love of the piece and Clara's interpretive decisions in a letter to his friend, music director Arnold Werner. He wrote, "You know how expressively Clara interprets his, Schumann's music. I have extraordinary joy in playing Robert's works with her, and I only wish you could share this joy. We played it, the D minor sonata, from the proof sheets. I consider it one of the finest compositions of our times in respect of its marvelous unity of feeling and its thematic significance. It overflows with noble passion, almost harsh and bitter in expression, and the last movement reminds one of the sea with its glorious waves of sound." Unfortunately, we can only imagine what Clara Schumann's and Joachim's interpretation of this work sounded like, but something we can hear for certain is Schumann's answer to the question that follows the sonata genre: which is the most important instrument? In the second movement, the scherzo, we'll hear virtuosic and complex material for violin and piano, material that melds and aligns to enforce cohesiveness while guiding our ear back and forth between each instrument, and even some of that harsh and bitterness and expression that Joachim described in his letter. We now move from Germany to Russia, from the 1850s to the 1940s. Composer Sergei Prokofiev is often mentioned in the same breath as his fellow influential Russian Soviet composers, Igor Stravinsky, Sergei Rachmaninoff, Dmitri Shostakovich. But unlike Rachmaninoff, who left Russia during the 1917 revolution and made a new home in the United States, Stravinsky, who replanted his professional and personal roots in Paris, and Shostakovich, who stayed in the Soviet Union, Prokofiev made a name for himself through extensive Western tours, and in 1936 returned to his home country, where he lived and worked for the remaining 2 decades of his life. In 1941, Prokofiev was evacuated from Moscow with other Russian artists to escape the Nazi invasion of Russia during World War II. Moving from the Caucasus Mountains to the city Alma-Ata, and this is like in the Central Asian region of the continent, Prokofiev continued to collaborate and compose. While working on the score for Sergei Eisenstein's Ivan the Terrible, Prokofiev completed the Flute Sonata in D, Opus 94, in 1943. He later reworked the sonata for violin and piano at the urging of his colleague David Oistrakh, who was a major Russian violinist, and he renamed the arrangement Violin Sonata No. 2 in D major, Opus 94A. The first movement, Moderato, illustrates an exciting relationship between flute and piano. Opening with a morose lyrical melody, the piano is mostly supportive, not only in its lack of melodic content, but supportive harmonic progressions. And then the piano starts to diverge. There are chords that sound out of place, growing in frequency until the flute makes an abrupt shift in melodic and tonal content. Its part is now angular, pointed, agitated, matching the character that the piano has been hinting at from the first dissonant chord, and we'll hear that right now. When you say the name William Grant Still, people who know his name, know his music, are likely to immediately envision Harlem. The hustle and bustle of people, Model T, streetcars, the lights, the energy, the symbolic and literal artistic innovation that made New York City the cultural nexus of America for over a century. Still is best known in classical music circles as the Dean of African American Composers. He was the first African American to have their symphony performed by a major ensemble. His Symphony Number 1, the Afro American, is one of the most commonly cited examples of Harlem Renaissance aesthetics in Western concert music. So it may be surprising to learn that in 1934, Still left New York City and made California his personal and professional home until his death in 1978. Composed the same year as Prokofiev's Flute Sonata, Still Suite for Violin and Piano is a three-movement work inspired by three works of art by African American artists. The second movement, Mother and Child, was inspired by the work of the same name by Sergeant Johnson, who has many artworks with that label. I have two examples of artworks by him with that title. So we have one from 1932 with the chalk on paper, and then the 1947 sculpture on the right-hand side. Now, I'm a bit biased towards this piece. I've played it several times. I love how Still takes full advantage of the violin's romantic capabilities through long phrasing, moving melodies an octave higher, shifting from E major to E minor and back again, conjuring a variety of interpretations. The mother and child's blissful interactions disturbed and rectified. A story of the proverbial child who wanders from their mother's love only to return, completely forgiven in the end. And while the violin is the melodic and emotive focal point, the piano is the single player in this piece. Listen to how the piano interacts with the violin, not only completing the soloist's musical ideas, but responding to them. Structurally, this is an example of call and response. Programmatically, it is a mother answering their child. Rebecca Clarke's career highlights the tensions women composers faced between the expectation, and in some cases the desire, to raise a family, stereotypes of women's creative abilities, and the economic and creative hustle that a composing career requires. Born in England, Clarke began her musical studies as a violinist, switching to viola while studying composition at the Royal College of Music. Supporting herself through performances, Clarke relocated to the United States in 1916, which would be her home until her death in 1979 at the age of 93. 3 years after her arrival in the States, Clarke tied for first place with Ernest Bloch in a competition sponsored by Elizabeth Sprague Coolidge. Her submission, the Viola Sonata, was a piece that has become her most programmed and recorded, reflective of an eclectic style that ranged from romantic to impressionistic to modernist. And just found this out from Rachel before the live stream, that out of all the sonatas and or duos that are programmed in the series, this Clarke's Viola Sonata was the most programmed within the Seattle Chamber Music Society's history. So thought that'd be an important note to mention. The snippet we'll hear today is from the second movement, Vivace. Clarke's sonata has 3 movements, and the second contains more rhythmic activity, dissonance, and forward motion than the first movement to provide a contrast in character. The vivace opens with rapid rhythms in the piano, the viola more in a supportive position with pizzicatos before moving back to the bow. Though not the only example, the movement that we're about to hear in a little bit shows how the sonata was not only a genre where one instrument takes center stage and the other backs them up. There's push and pull, a sharing of roles, and in some cases more duet than the piece's name may suggest. After Edvard Grieg, who was an important contemporary and friend, Johan Halvorsen was one of the most prominent Norwegian composers at the turn of the 20th century. Stylistically tied to Norwegian music nationalism and romanticism like his more illustrious colleague, Halvorsen was also interested in the creative possibilities of Baroque-era forms for contemporary works. His Sarabande con variazioni for violin and viola is one of several pieces that takes a theme from a Baroque piece as a jumping-off point for experimentation, elaboration, and re-engagement. The Sarabande takes its theme and name from the Sarabande movement of George Friedrich Handel's keyboard suite in D minor, which was composed between 1703 and 1706. Halvorsen's background as a violinist and orchestral player comes through in this work. The balance and communication between the violin and viola emphasize the essential role each instrument provides for the other. Schumann's 5 pieces in folk style, let me repeat that again. Schumann's 5 pieces in folk style for cello and piano was completed in 1849. While less concerned with merging German folk traditions with classical forms than hinting to or signifying folk music and style, this work highlights the variety of expression and character work that Schumann is best known for, especially in his lieder or art songs. From the first movement, whose content lives up to the descriptor with humor, to the evocation of a folk dance in the last movement, this piece again highlights the duet nature that a lot of composers utilized, not only within sonatas, but also within pieces such as this one that might have been associated with lighter fare. So we'll take a listen to the last movement of the Schumann. In our final example, we return to William Grant Still and to a work for piano called Three Visions. It was composed 2 years after his move to California. Making Los Angeles his new home brought with it a new environment, not only geographically, but culturally and aesthetically. It was during this time that Still began to move away from his interest in using blues idioms within a musical eclecticism and towards a style that represented America's multicultural life and history. Still named his new aesthetic the universal idiom and described it as such, the belief that all ethnic groups had something important to contribute musically and culturally to his music. In a 1967 interview, he elaborated that this creative shift occurred, I would say, almost about the same time that I came out here, when he came out to LA. While I still intended to devote myself to giving expression, to a very large extent, to the use of the Negroid idiom, I did not want to confine myself to that particular idiom because I think that here in America, we have so many idioms, the Indian music, the Creole music, and so on. I would like to write music that expresses America, rather than confine myself to writing just Negro music. Even so, the Negro, being part of America, is important, and I am not leaving him out. We can hear the beginnings of the stylistic shift in Three Visions for piano. In this clip from the second movement, titled Summerland, which was also arranged for violin and piano, Black folk idioms combined with impressionistic sonorities. Summerland oscillates between linear and circular directions. Still makes full use of the piano's varied resonance abilities, with passages and notes that remain suspended, sometimes overlapping with or making way for the new melodic ideas. I want to thank you again for this opportunity to listen and talk through some exciting and engaging music with us on this journey. This is just a taste of the many ways composers have helped define what we expect to hear when we listen to a sonata, as well as the many ways composers challenged what sonatas could communicate emotionally and programmatically. I hope this lecture has added to your knowledge and love of these pieces and of the sonata genre more broadly. and that it will make your listening of these works from the guest artists of this series an experience that is even more enriching and fulfilling. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Kori.
You're welcome. Thank you.
We have a few questions. I've been making some notes. First of all, of the, I think it was 8 pieces that you shared, are there one or two you are most excited to hear on the festival? Can you share your personal favorite?
Goodness. Yes. Yes. I'm biased. So definitely still Suite for Violin and Piano. Definitely the Three Visions, but I also have to say the Halvorsen, that the Sarabande variations, that one I'm really interested in hearing, because even though I've been playing violin for over 20 years, I also switched to viola for a little bit in high school and almost switched for good to viola, so I have a special place in my heart for violin and viola duets, especially. And I'd say the Halvorsen, the Stills, and I have to say the Rebecca Clarke too, because especially with that vivace, that her what she does in that whole piece, it's just really, it's nice to have like really virtuosic crazy stuff for viola, because sometimes I think yeah, we don't always get as much of that as we can handle because of just the nature of the instrument. So yeah, the Clarke, Halvorsen, and then the 2 Still pieces I'm most looking forward to.
I am equally excited about those. Question. So William Grant Still was really, he was a contemporary with Florence Price.
Yes.
I mean, he's it's, top of his Wikipedia page that he was the first African-American composer to have a symphony played by a major orchestra, which I think happened in 1930, but Florence Price had a symphony premiered in 1933. So he's falling right on his heels. And I'm just curious, did they have a relationship while they were alive, and what was their relationship?
Yeah, thank you for that question. So, because Florence Price was born in Little Rock, Arkansas, Still was born in Mississippi, but moved to Little Rock when he was a child, and so they were in the same networks growing up, even though let's see, Price was born in 87, Still was born in 95, so it was a little more, almost like a 10-year age gap between them, but Still's mother was one of Florence Price's teachers in high school, and then as they started to get into their professional careers, they did have like kind of like an on and off correspondence relationship, but they definitely knew of each other and were in, if not the exact same circles all the time, circles that overlapped and kind of moved in between and out of each other. And I wish I had Raylinda Brown's biography on hand. It's upstairs, but in like the 1940s, Price is writing letters to Still. And yeah, so they had like not like a strictly consistent, but there was correspondence between them until her death in 1953, her early death, and even within the press of the time, it was Florence Price, it was William Grant Still, it was William Dawson. These were like the big 3 for a lot of composers, because they were the first 3 Black composers to have their symphonies performed by major ensembles. So with Still, it was Rochester. He was colleague and like mentee of Howard Hanson, the composer, and so that was that Eastman connection. And then Florence Price, it was the Chicago Symphony, and with William Dawson with the Negro Folk Symphony, that was also the early 1930s as well. But it was, yeah, so not only professionally but also personally, Still and Price did have a connection, yeah, that spanned decades. So yeah, very much up in there.
That's fun. I have a question. We're curious. You mentioned that sonata duos are often really more like duets between the instruments rather than like a soloistic work with an accompanist.
Mm-hmm.
And do you think as listeners, when we're watching a sonata that we should be more, I wonder sometimes if the piano, just because it's like literally behind the person playing, if it's a piano, I think like with the violin viola sonata, I think that it'll be a little more obvious that you should be keeping your eyes on both. But do you think that people have a tendency to focus more on the front instrument and they should be paying equal attention to the piano?
Yeah, yes, and I have even felt that when I've performed sonatas with pianists, because even with the whole setup, like we're like, yeah, as you said, standing in front, and the pianist is near the back, and I understand, like with the acoustic needs of the instrument too, that it's better make sure that especially with grands and baby grands, that the strings, like the lid is open so that the sound goes out to the audience. But yeah, and I even think that sometimes with some even the, I don't know if it's always the nature of the writing of the piece, but also the interpretive lens that we bring to it that sometimes adds to the focus being, say, on the violinist or the violist more than the pianist, even though there is a lot of back and forth duet type stuff that is going on, that needs to go on for the musical line to flow, for the even if the piece isn't technically programmatic, for the narrative ideas to have a clear start, apex, and conclusive point, if that is like the structure of the melody. And yeah, so I think and again, this is like going off of my personal experience, not to say like every person that's played sonatas has felt this, but have wanted in my setup to better communicate physically, like, hey, I am having a conversation with the pianist. They're not just here like plunking chords just to have something fill the void to support what I'm doing. Like, it's if we didn't need the part, it wouldn't be there. And so I think, yeah, it's not even orally a matter of communicating, but also the physicality of it too. And sometimes how we stand or where we stand, yeah, greatly impacts how listeners hear and who they pay attention to.
All right. Don't forget the pianists. We have
Yes.
Asking about, with William Grant Still and Florence Price, they asked, how much did gender affect their careers?
Here we go. Okay. Let's see. Goodness. Oh, we could be here for a long time. Let's see. So I'll start with Florence Price, because a mix of it, because it kind of gets into a similar situation with Rebecca Clarke, even though I didn't mention this in the little description about her, but when she moved to the United States, she got married, had a family, and her composing activity slacked off. And part of it was, it's just when you're raising kids, like, it takes a lot of your time and energy. But she also felt it was not compatible with her duty, her role as a wife and mother. Now, with Florence Price, when she got married, so this was 1912, she has 3 kids. The first child, a son, unfortunately passed away in infancy. But while she's raising their 2 daughters, she is still composing, like not at the level she was doing when she was at the New England Conservatory, or that she would do when she moved to Chicago in the late 20s, but she's still writing stuff. Whereas with William Grant Still, he also gets married. I think he and his wife had maybe 4 or 5 kids. But you start to see, but they end up being in different places. Like they had a long distance marriage, which eventually disintegrated with Still being in New York and really getting into, because in addition to classical music, he also worked within the musical theater circuit, like working with W.C. Handy, U.B. Blake as a performer and composer and arranger, and so that takes up the majority of his time. And so he and his wife, even though they were also creative collaborators too, because of the distance and how he was able to prioritize the composing, again, because even though as a black man in a predominantly white field, he's a dude still, they eventually go their separate ways. She and the children relocate to Europe. And then, so going back to Price and Still, with Price too, she gets divorced in I think 1931 or 32. It's right before the premiere of her symphony, and it is from the majority of the 30s until her children are grown and out on their own, that she is a single mother, not only wanting to have a career as a composer, but she's composing, she's teaching, she's performing, she's writing popular music, playing for providing scores for like silent theaters. She's like doing all this stuff, and on the one hand, like, oh, she's getting all these opportunities, but it's also she's hustling, she's needing to make money, there's this letter that she wrote to Kusevitsky. Oh, well, not one letter. She wrote him 4 times between 1935 into the 1940s, saying like, hey, I have these pieces. I'd really like you to listen to them, and acknowledging the systemic discrimination that she faces as a Black woman composing classical music. And there was, his secretary responded to her once. I think this was after the 3rd letter. And so she sent him another score. She had sent him a score the first time she wrote him in 35, and there was nothing. So she writes him again several years later, again, and then again. And but he never programs her work the first time, I think, because he was music director at Boston too. And Price, with her background studying at the New England Conservatory, the Boston musical networks at that time were like very, very influential. So even with the foothold she had in Chicago, amongst like the Black Chicago classical music community, and even with the premiere with the Chicago Symphony, her main goal was like to really get back into that Boston network, which never materialized, even though she did get she was scheduled to go to Europe to collaborate in the early 50s when she got sick and passed away. And then again, sorry, this is like longer than the question of probably wanted it to be, but then just, and so it's, so yeah, so with the reception of Price's music compared to Still's, like when they are discussed together, there was one review in the Chicago Defender where they mention Price's work but don't mention her by name, whereas Dawson and Still are named. And so it's still very, even amongst communities of Black classical musicians, the role of composer is still very gendered male, whereas you see, and even in the administration too, a lot of repertoire that is programmed is predominantly that of Black men. And so yeah, it did have a significant role, not only how she was received within the white mainstream, but also the Black mainstream as well. Even though she is, again, that is not to say that she wasn't written up a lot. She was, yeah, it's not uncommon to come across her name in the 30s and 40s in the Chicago Defender. But at the same time, her professional success at that time still was not at the level of consistency that William Grant Still was able to achieve. And I think too, also he had, not only gender wise, but also the networks that he was involved in and continued to foster had a big role in that as well. So I'll stop there because I could just keep going on and on. Like, oh, actually, this over here and this over here. So I'll stop.
Yes, it's a rich question. I think that our other one of it's not a sonata on the festival, but we are playing a piano trio by Jennifer Higdon, who's a great composer, and I think she would agree that these are not issues that have, but they've by no means gone away in our current times.
Yes.
Oh, great! The questioner wrote back and said that was perfect, not at all.
Okay, all right, good. I'm glad that was helpful.
Oh, she's putting you on the spot. She says that she loves the music that Price wrote, and she thinks she's a better composer than William Grant Still.
Oh, we're getting into that now. Oh goodness. Oh dear.
Are you willing to state that in public?
Because I very much. Oh goodness, I can't because I haven't with Stills music. I haven't like analyzed it as much as I've analyzed Price's. Because like Price is the topic of my dissertation. Oh, big surprise there. But oh, I don't know that because I can't. I see it's my musicology brain turning on where we're like, oh, when we say one's better than the other, it's all about personal preference and stuff. But it's I don't know. I mean, if do they say what specific piece in relation to that they've like compared and like, oh no, she does
That's
this is better.
specific.
No.
Yes.
Okay, yeah.
Yes.
I mean, I can't. I mean, I found myself leaning more towards Price's stuff. I think sometimes she does stuff more interesting, thematic, textual things than Still does. So I'll say that. I can never. Uh, I'm sorry. I'm going to chicken out and say don't have an opinion right now. But yeah, can you ask me again in like 3 years and like yeah, maybe I'll be like, okay, no, Price all the way, all the way.
Well, thank you so much. I think we'll stop asking you on the spot questions and let you go. I really appreciate your time and the effort that you put into educating all of us about these pieces that we're going to be all able to hear. And I just want to remind our wonderful audience that Winter Festival, Seattle Chamber Music Society, coming up very soon. You can go to our website, you can subscribe to the whole thing and get to hear every single one of the pieces that Kori's talked about tonight, or you could pick and choose and just listen to a concert or two. They're going to start dropping on the internet on February the 3rd, but we do have several other live events coming up that'll be coming to you live from the space where I am with our musicians who start arriving and rehearsing and recording next week. We're going to have a panel discussion next Thursday about the impact of COVID with James Ennis, our artistic director, as well as 2 or 3 other musicians, just talking about how it's impacted their careers and how they've, reacted to this new brave new world that we are living through. And we're going to have 2 open rehearsals. That'll be happening next Friday and the following Sunday. So you can hear a little preview of a couple of the pieces that we'll be doing, and watch your emails for an event also on Tuesday the 19th. I think we're going to do a little kickoff event and show you around the space and introduce you to some of our musicians. So we'd love to have everyone join us. All of those events are going to be free. And again, those are all happening the next 2 weeks. So we'd love to see you there. And thank you so much, Kori.
Thank you, Rachel. This was great. Really enjoyed being able to talk through this. So
thanks, everybody.